I'm going to ramble a little bit at the beginning rather than give a particular discourse, although I'll come around to that. But I wanted to say a few things. The first being this, that when that project was begun in Assisi, fortunately we didn't know how much it would cost. Fortunately, we didn't know how difficult it would be. If we had counted up the cost, as Padma so aptly did, it would have seemed overwhelming. I have to say it was not overwhelming. It was really a catalyst for growth. Long before we had the temple, there was an enthusiasm, a strength of dedication and purpose. It built itself. It was a very important part of the history of our work in Italy, which began in very small ways, but with that temple, it really materialized. People seeing that we really were doing something so impossible and dedicated to finishing it, brought people from all over Europe, from America, from everywhere. And they really did put their hearts into working on it. Don't worry about it being, Padma's made it seem very possible. Then it didn't seem possible, and yet it was possible. It did happen, and I know that this will happen. It is up to all of us to help make it happen. Now, this has been a bit of an afternoon of reminiscing, and I heard people talk about the beginnings of Ananda. Well, there was another beginning. It wasn't exactly Ananda, but let's start even farther back than that. Back in, I think it was 1949, when there was this great garden party in Beverly Hills. And there must have been a minimum of 200 people, perhaps quite a bit more. And Master, in this photograph right here, he was talking about the importance of communities. And then he raised his hands and sent Om as a blessing to the whole world that this concept would spread. This photograph was taken of that moment. And it's prophetic that not only do we have that picture of him giving that blessing, but also this temple, which I think is going to crystallize as a symbol of that teaching everywhere. Well, this first teaching, this first little anecdote that I'm going to tell you, is really more for fun than anything else, and yet it has a purpose. Because see what Master was talking, he was saying to the whole world. Master was talking about going north, south, east, west, spreading this thing everywhere. Well, in 1956, I was the head of the Center Department in Mount Washington of Self-Realization Fellowship. And I was to come to, I gave a few tours. In 1954, I went to Mexico, and this 1956 when I was to go up north and talk in Vancouver, because we had a large center there in Vancouver. In Bremerton, we had a tiny little group of 3 people. And Signe Schultz, who was the center leader, meditation group leader at the time, she wrote to me and said that she was planning a lecture. Well, I'd had some experience with what it takes to plan a lecture. This thing here today was far beyond her capacity. It took a lot of planning, extremely, very good planning. And as I was saying, I really think you guys are a hard act to follow. But she wrote and said that she'd planned this thing, and I hastily, it was more difficult to call long distance in those days, but even though 56 wasn't that long ago, but it was not so easy. And I said, Signe, please, all I want to do is stop by there, meditate with your little group, then go to this lecture that I have to give in Vancouver. Oh, no, we have it all planned. I thought, well, I knew it would be a fiasco. I thought, what does it matter? It's all a dream anyway. So I didn't say anything more, and I went up there, and she met me. I don't know how you get to Bremerton now, but you went by ferry then. Do you still go by ferry? Well, when I landed, she showed me this little ad that she had placed to publicize this great event. It was a little 1-by-1 in the newspaper, local newspaper, special meeting SRF members on such and such an evening at such and such an hour. Well, that is not the way to spread this work, north, south, east, west. Anything that says special meeting SRF members is going to automatically exclude anybody who isn't an SRF member. We knew how many members there were, 3. So I just thought, well, it's all a divine play. It doesn't matter. I said, what else have you done? Oh, I gave this to the local radio station. I said, just that exact announcement? Yes, yes. Well, you know what happens with these things. I said, did you give it to the announcer himself? No, I gave it to the secretary. You know what happens with things like that. There's a round file for that kind of thing. So I knew we were coming into a disastrous evening. I just thought, well, it's going to be fun. I have never in my life worked so hard to interest an audience, just for the sheer challenge of it. It was, for one thing, one of those nights that I hope are not so common here, absolutely driving rainfall. There were our 3 members in a hall big enough for quite a few people. Signe Schultz and all her tribe, her relatives. There were about 6 children in the front row, squirming, but they had to be there. A few relatives, there was a sort of, I don't know what kind of a relative sitting behind the children, and she had a little book about this big and was sort of turning the pages, reading. There was another one behind that woman who had a watch that he kept shaking. And all the time, Signe Schultz was sitting there not listening to a word. I know she wasn't listening because whenever I'd tell a joke, she just would react the same way as if I didn't tell a joke. But always with this brave smile trying to encourage her relatives to take an interest. I had a lot of fun. It was great fun. But then afterwards, this was the payoff. There was one person who came who wasn't a relative, wasn't a member, but occasionally attended the meditations and came out of some mild interest, who we didn't know how deep or anything, but she was there. And Signe Schultz said to me, oh, I know many more people would have come, except that Gaylord Hauser was lecturing tonight also. You know who he was? He was a famous health lecturer at that time. Well, this one non-member and non-relative heard her. She said, oh dear, you mean it was tonight? I thought I'll never go lower than this. Everything from now on will be up, so this is great. But that was the real beginning of our work in the Seattle area, if you can call it a beginning. Well, anyway, another thing that remains in memory, because when they designed this dome, I didn't tell them that I had had this idea, but when I was going to build a temple in India back in 1961, 62, I wanted to build a dome for one reason. I meditated on the different shapes, and I realized that a flat ceiling, in a way, unless it's very high, sort of presses down on the head. And that's what we have at our present thing here in Seattle, sort of just a plain flat ceiling. But the head is a dome in itself. And it seemed to me that if the ceiling of a temple is rounded like that, it's as if the rays going out from the head come back in a harmonious way. I don't know enough about these things to be authoritative, but I can say this was my impression. I had a very interesting experience that endorsed that expression years later. I was in the Morrison Planetarium in San Francisco. And I was sitting there waiting for the show to begin when all of a sudden this tribe of children came in and settled themselves all around me, giggling, squirming, elbowing each other, all the things that children do to express their restlessness. And I was thinking of moving because it felt so peaceful there. But you know what really impressed me was that one by one, every one of these children began to quiet down until all of them were just completely peaceful. Now, it was the shape of that building that did it. There is a certain feeling in a dome that is inducive to calmness, to meditation. And when that Russian lady, Tanya, came there, I don't think it was just the vibrations people had put in, although that was certainly important. But I think it was also that shape. I think there's nothing better at this time. It's curious, I saw a book some years ago on the typical structure of the different yugas. And the square box kind of thing was Kali Yuga, which is very confining and in space. The typical building for Dwapara Yuga was this half dome. I mean the dome, half sphere. Then for Treta Yuga was the pyramid. And when you go to the pyramid, you do feel a focused power, but that's not this age. Here we need the calmness. And I would imagine that the perfect shape for Satya Yuga, for the highest age, is the sphere. But that's another issue. I think most people then, you think, why back in those days were there not more edifices that we can see? They were highly advanced. They didn't need that kind of thing. They had the whole world. They had this sphere that they were living on and under. Anyway, that thought, I was so glad when I found that that's what they were planning to do in Assisi. I'm so glad that that's what we're going to be doing here. You know, when I first began Ananda, I wanted that kind of a building, but it wasn't, I didn't know how to do it, and I didn't know that anybody did know how. I found the geodesic dome of Buckminster Fuller, and I wasn't happy because it's a conflict aesthetically. You've got flat planes, straight lines, all creating an illusion of a hemisphere. It was a little offensive to me aesthetically, but it was the best thing we could come up with. And I was asked, do you want the ribs that we have in Assisi? Not necessarily. A real hemisphere could be beautiful. I understand there's a company here that does these things from the Northwest somewhere. I just saw an article recently. It could be wonderful. I would urge all of you who are getting involved in that to consider that one too. Nonetheless, this too is sort of a reminiscence of how this came about, how Ananda came about, how Ananda Assisi came about. But you know, it's so interesting when we think of Master, the first thing he did before he came to America was to write this book. Well, it was not this book. I've rewritten it I'll explain that in a moment. But the concept of the science of religion was the concept behind this book. And he wrote that as a means of sort of presenting Americans with his plan, his message. He didn't come only to speak in Boston, he came to deliver a message to the world. And that message was, he didn't know, actually the story was told to me by Swami Satyananda, who was a disciple of his from back when they were boys. And Swami Satyananda told me that when Master came back from Japan, in the story that you read about in Autobiography of a Yogi, he had the inspiration, the insight for how to spread his message everywhere. And he didn't know English, And so he didn't dare write in English, so he wrote it in an outline in Bengali. Then a disciple of his, Swami Kriyananda, who became that later, at this time his name was Bakshi, but Master asked him, because he was scholarly and had an MA degree later he got, and so on, so he asked him if he would write that book out from his notes. So what happened first was that in 1955, Tara Mata, or Laurie Pratt as I knew her in those days, she was Master's editor. And she said to me one day on the phone, we used to talk on the phone quite often, and she said, I'm thinking of suspending the publication of Science of Religion. And I said, why on earth would you do that? That's the central teaching, central part of his message, his mission. And she said, well, Master never wrote that. Well, I couldn't put that together. I mean, this was such an important book. And when she said he never wrote it, I just couldn't put that together. I just said, well, you can't get rid of that book. It's just too basic. So I guess she listened to me, or my comment influenced her enough to keep it in print. But then later I discovered how it actually had been written, and Master hadn't written it, but he did write it because it was his ideas. Ananda was, in the common parlance, the ghostwriter. Well, of course, I'm the ghostwriter, and I'm the only one in flesh and blood right now. All those others are no longer in the body. But back over a year ago in April, Sean, the head of our publications department in Ananda village, said to me he was thinking of putting this book out. And I thought, I remembered what Laurie Pratt had said, I remembered what Satyananda had said, and I remembered that I'd always loved the book, but not for its style, for its contents, for its ideas. Great book. But I said, well, don't do it yet, let me think about it. And I thought maybe I could just go through the book, and it was very pedantically and heavily written, too scholarly. And although I loved it myself, and I imagine some people here loved it, a lot of you all have told me that you were never able to finish the book. It was too heavy and dull, and no grace to it, no charm, just sort of heavy ideas given in such a self-important way that it is a bit offensive when you think of it from the standpoint of style. I thought, well, maybe I could bring it up to speed a little bit just from the standpoint of style. As I got into it, working on it this way, I didn't get very far into it when I began realizing, because when you begin analyzing, you know what you're really saying. And it just didn't work. I thought, well, what's the matter with this thing? He was saying that everybody is trying to escape pain and find happiness. Well, pain and happiness are not opposites. You can be very happy and still be in great physical pain. I've done it. I'm sure most of you have done it. It isn't physical pain and happiness that are opposites. Pain and pleasure are opposites. That's different. But sorrow and happiness are opposites, yes. But you can't say that you can't leap from pain to happiness. Another thing the book failed to do was give any sense of a bridge between human emotion of happiness and bliss, which is God. And so the central core of what this book was all about really was not clear. And so I realized that I'd just have to redo it altogether. I ended up throwing out all of the examples that Ananda had used, throwing out almost everything he did, keeping the essence of Master's teachings. I had, however, the advantage of knowing his teachings, knowing what he said, living with him, hearing him discuss these things, teaching these things for the last, well, I've been teaching now for 54 years. I began at 22. It was quite an experience. I've mentioned it in my book, The Path, but how I was at Mount Washington just a few months when I was given the job of working in the office. Master, knowing that I was a writer, wanted to get me into that writing mode more. And he had me, they had me, whoever had me, I don't really know, sending out the announcements to the papers when Master would appear or who would appear in which church on Sunday. And I knew that Master had not spoken in his church in San Diego for quite a long time. When he did, it was spotty. He'd come and then not come again for a long time. And it was March that I was told to put his name in the paper for, no, it was May, but I knew that since March he hadn't come to the San Diego church. And as I put the ad in the paper, I thought, boy, there are going to be an awful lot of happy people. Well, that was for a Sunday talk. I was still 22 years old. And Saturday morning, this, mind you, for Sunday morning talk, Saturday morning, Bernard came down to my room and said, Master wants you to talk in his place. I'd never spoken before in public. I'd only attended one Kriya, and he wanted me to give Kriya afterwards, too. He was throwing me out of the nest, no question, of seeing if I could fly. And it was quite an adventure. The church was absolutely packed. People were peering in the window from outside. They couldn't get in. Standing room only inside. I guess I didn't get nervous. And the reason I didn't get nervous is perfectly clear and understandable. I was so sorry for those poor people. Here they were, stuck with having to hear me when they'd been waiting so long. In those days, they had the curtains closed. And then when the service began, the curtains opened. Well, excuse me. Up to that moment, everybody expected Master to appear. And then the curtain opened, and there was this little boy of set 22. Poor people. They showed their greatness of spirit by nobody walking out. But anyway, this was the essence of his message from day one. And it's one that I have talked on from different angles all these years. I am so thrilled that I've been able to bring it out in a way that I feel is very satisfying. I hardly count in this story. I have a certain ability to make things clear and enjoyable to read and simple, but it's his teaching. And that's the teaching that is in this book. It's very subtle, very deep, and very wonderful. The basis of it is this, that everybody in the world, and that's why this book is God is for everyone. Everybody in the world wants certain basic things. And it's not that, oh, I want to be a bus driver, I can't think of anything more wonderful, or I want to be the CEO of IBM, or I want to be president, or this thing or that thing. Everybody wants to escape pain and escape sorrow and find happiness. And that's not all. They really want bliss. And this is all they know of bliss. And the more they find of that bliss, or that happiness, I should say, the more they discover that happiness is not a warm puppy or a beautiful cottage by the sea. If you imagine the thing that you think would really make you completely happy, many people have that image of a lovely cottage by the sea with rose-colored trellis and a beautiful flower garden with birds flitting around and good friends coming in the evening and chatting and comfortable furniture and beautiful weather and all the dream that people have when they think of retiring, if nothing else. Think about that for a year. Wonderful. Think about it for 2 years. Okay. 10 years. I don't know. You reach the point finally where you begin to wonder, and this is the way Master used to put it, that you begin to wish that somebody would hit you on the head to see if you're still alive. It can get boring. Happiness in itself isn't enough. People need excitement. They need oppositions. They need opposite states. This is how this world is set up. We not only get opposition to everything, we want it, really. Because as long as our minds are going outward, we're really on a swing. And what goes left is going to go right. When God created this universe, He was, and this is bringing it back to the other end of the whole talk here, He was absolute bliss. Bliss is the foundation of everything. But that bliss had to be broken up into a world of appearances. And so these tables, this chair, these pillars, all these things that seem so solid, they're not that at all. They're really just vibrations, vibrations of energy. And science today has shown that everything material is only energy. But this energy is really created by vibration. The world of matter is a vibration of energy. Energy is a vibration of consciousness. It's the world of ideas manifested as energy. God was absolute, like the ocean, a very good illustration on which appear the waves. For every crest, there has to be a trough. The height of waves does not change or affect in any way the overall level of the ocean. You could, and if you think of each person as a wave, many people try to. They try to become so important, like Napoleon building, conquering all these nations, becoming this great emperor. The world doesn't change at all. It's always the same thing. For every up, you're going to have a down. We were crossing the Atlantic a year and a half ago, and the waves were very high. But there were also these deep troughs, have to be. Wherever there is vibration, there is going to be oppositional contrast. And that contrast goes not just material. It'll be between pleasure and pain, sorrow and happiness, inevitable. The more people seek happiness, look at people who think they want to find their happiness in pleasure, and that the more pleasurable they find life, the more wonderful it'll be. The more I get drunk. Well, what happens when you get drunk? The morning after? We all know the feeling, not necessarily of drinking, but of emotional downs. I had this, I mentioned this just the other evening, when I got our motorhome to go on tour across the country. It was a great experience because I'd always dreamed of having a motorhome that I could tour around in and spread the teachings and so on. And so when I got it, I really allowed myself, something I don't ever normally do, just to become completely happy. I remember I sat back in the seat there laughing my head off. This is so wonderful that we finally have this thing. And then I knew, I said, uh-oh. You've let yourself go, you're going to have the opposite. And it happened that same evening. Somebody who shall remain nameless only because I've named him so often. Well, there was somebody there who's never heard it. It was Vidura. We were stopped in a Safeway parking lot, and he was driving, and it was new to us, and so he didn't quite know, and didn't know to put it in parking, and it was standing there, and it wasn't moving, so he got up to go back to the fridge to get something. Well, the thing was moving just like this, very, very slowly, until finally it hit the wall of the Safeway supermarket. And it wasn't a big accident at all, not like that Arab who bought a motorhome and was told that when you put it in, what do you call it, control, cruise control, it'll just drive itself, and he took it literally. And he was on the freeway and put it in its cruise control and went back to the fridge, and all of a sudden, you can just imagine what happened and did happen. But anyway, it didn't hit hard, but I was perched on one of the seats there to get something from the overhead drawer, or whatever they call it, bin. And as soon as it hit that, it just threw me on the floor, broke a finger, and of course bruised me. And I lay back and I laughed and laughed. I thought, this is a perfect example of compensation. This is how this world is. For every plus, there's going to be a minus. For every joy, there's going to be a sorrow. For every pleasure, there's going to be an opposite. Now, how do you stop that? You have to resist these things. Non-attachment's very important. Don't go hog wild over every little thing that goes right, because you know it isn't going to. The law is such that it cannot. The law is such that for every up, there's going to be a down. And that will be so forever until you go back to God. And then it all melts away. It's like ocean waves. The closer those waves come to the bosom of the ocean, the lower the waves are, and the more they feel a part of that expansiveness. But the more the waves push themselves up in ego, the more they're going to be crashing against other waves and suffering in the process, imagining, of course, I'm talking allegorically. But then in the end, they come crashing down anyway. That's the law of life. And it's really an irony, because when you think how hard people work to get it all together, I'll just get that house, I'll get that job, I'll get that wife or that husband, I'll have these children. And just think of all the things that can go wrong in each one of those. Not even going to bother to name them. I mean, you get children and you think, now I've created something. You haven't done any such thing. You've invited somebody, a complete stranger probably. You want that child to be a reflection of you. I can just talk from my experience. I haven't had children, but I've been a child. My poor father. He wanted me to be an electrical engineer, and look at me. You can't control these things. Life is just going to be what it is. But I can guarantee you one thing. I can make an absolute statement that at the end of every effort that you make to finally get it all together and have it just the way you want it, what will the sum total be? 0. It can't be anything but that. It's got to cancel itself out, because the reality is not the waves going up or down. The reality is not what you've succeeded finally in getting after God knows how many tears and heartaches. The reality is cancellation of everything and the realization of that bliss. Now that's what it is, really. That's the last thing people expect. I remember when Ananda Ma, she had her headquarters in Benares, and she was hundreds of miles away in Calcutta. And a Ganges flood swept away that main temple, and everybody was grieving and so on. Well, the night before they even got the news, she was laughing away. And they said, "What is it, Mother?" "Oh, that temple of yours, it went in the Ganges." When the news came, they were just crestfallen. She said, "Don't you have any compassion? That poor thing was standing all those years, and it was tired. It needed to sit down." Well, that's because she had bliss, and she knew that what it's really all about is bliss. The more you can live in bliss, the more you can live close to God, the more you enjoy it all. When things go well, wonderful. When things don't go well, wonderful. And you're grateful for everything, but above all, you're grateful for the only thing that really matters. I know when we were having this law trial years ago, I was thinking they can take everything from me. They can never take away from me what matters to me, the only thing that matters to me, my love for you. And so I was completely at peace in the whole thing, and people could tell all the lies they wanted. Let them do it. I tried to say something, And their lawyer said, "Oh, yes, Mr. Walters, we know you like to be eloquent." What are you going to do? There's just nothing to say under those circumstances. I just decided I'm going to be blissful, and that's what I was. Be yourself, and that means bliss. And know that at the end of everything, there is bliss. Look how Ananda has grown since those years. It's been a great blessing. But don't expect the blessing to be always the same. Somebody asked me a question in a question and answer period the other day. Do you think your trials are over? Not until I'm dead. And of course, I'll never be dead, so they'll go on. Don't worry about that. But do know that everything that you do, it doesn't mean that there's no point in doing anything. It means that the more you can express God's bliss, the more you can bring that truth out in your life and in what you're doing, that is the positive thing that we can all do. And yes, it may not be in the form of a building or this thing or that thing, but the building is a symbol. And it will make it possible for many hundreds of other people to learn about it, not because we expect someday to take over the world. We're just us. Whether God wants us, whether God imposes that burden on us, is His business. Certainly it'll be a lot nicer if He doesn't, but we're here to be servants of whatever ray He gives us and whatever way we can help Him. This temple is a wonderful opportunity in that way. And don't think, well, but gosh, if we get it, it'll fall or something will happen. That will happen in time. Of course it'll happen. That may take a few hundred years, though. It's that the joy that we're expressing grows in proportion to the amount that we put energy out. The more you make yourselves channels of that divine love, the more you find that you do benefit others, you do bring blessings to others, and it in itself is a great satisfaction. Ananda didn't exist many years ago. I was 15 years old when I first got the idea of building a community. I managed to enthuse a few friends and relatives until they reached the point of realizing I was serious, then they all fled for the hills. But it always remained there, and when I found that Master wanted it, then I sort of picked up more enthusiasm for it. And after this talk at Beverly Hills, there were, as I said, at least 200 people, maybe more. I didn't try to count them. He was talking with so much passion, trying to enthuse us to do this, put this idea into motion. And I think, judging from the results, I must have been the only one who vowed that day I would make it happen. I said, if you give me the power and the inspiration and the guidance, I will do it. You know, it was very shortly after that that he looked at me one day. There was me and Herbert Fried standing there, and Master was in the car, and he was just about to go out. And he was giving Herbert Fried some instructions for Phoenix, because he was going back there to be in charge of the church in Phoenix. And then Master said, you have a great work to do. And I looked at, see, I was short-sighted. I've had laser surgery so I can see you all now. But I couldn't see his expression clearly, and I got the impression he must be looking at Herbert. That's what the center of the conversation was. He said, you have a great work to do. And I looked at Herbert with a sort of a congratulatory expression, sort of wishing him well. The Master said, it's you I'm talking to, Walter. And I didn't know what he was talking about. But many times from then on, he would say, you have a great work to do, or you must do this because you have a great work to do. Many times he brought up that subject, not in front of others, this was in front of others, but the other times were not. I think he knew that Ananda was still in the offing. How could he not? He's with us right now. He was with us then. I think he saw you all just 2 or 3 days before his passing, or was it a week? I said to him, that vision that you had in Ranchi of all the Americans, I said, have you seen them all? He said, no, there are just 2 or 3 left to come. And in that last week, Mrs. Erbatiso, Mokshananda, and one other came, and that was the end. But he knew it all. He knew that there were still 2 or 3 left to come. I'm sure he saw you all. But this is a wave of energy that God gave him to bring to the world. And my greatest honor is to just walk in those footsteps and try to help further his ideal. That's what I've done in writing this book. I've only tried to be his amanuensis, to bring this teaching out to people in such a way that people will suddenly realize that is what I'm looking for. People don't know that they're looking for God. They think they want gold, power, position, fame, name, all the things people look for. But behind everything that they're seeking, their dream is to find happiness. And that's the sad thing about life. How many people look bitter, are bitter by the end of life. They got it, they got what they wanted, and it was nothing. Howard Hughes, the richest man in the world, some reporter managed to get to him a week before he died. And he said, are you happy? He said, nah, I can't say that I'm happy. Most people would give everything to be as rich as he was. You know, those Mexicans who were crossing illegally into Southern California and Arizona and New Mexico, they were the ones who were absolutely the most anti the hippies. Because these hippies came from well-to-do homes, most of them, living lives that were scruffier than the ones the Mexicans had left behind. And to them it was an absolute denial of everything those Mexicans had come to achieve. That's why they hated them. Because your dream, you think is going to give you something. In the end, it just turns into ashes. That's what Ian Fleming said. Somebody asked him, how does it feel to be famous? And he said, it's just ashes. I think one of the nicest compliments I got ever was back in San Francisco at the opening of, the dedication of the installation of Richard Baker as the Roshi of the Zen temple there. And because he was a friend of mine, I attended. And afterwards, I was talking to some young woman in the group there, and she asked me after a while, I asked her what her name was, and she told me, and she asked me my name, I told her, and she said, oh, Kriyananda, but you're famous. I said, well, maybe, but why do you say but? She said, well, all the famous people I've met seem important. I like that answer. I'm not important. But I know what she meant. I meant they seem self-important. What is fame? It doesn't mean anything. You're the same fellow that your mother held up and spanked or your doctor did when you were born. Don't take yourself seriously, because whatever you've got, you're going to lose. But your bliss you won't lose. Yourself you won't lose. You know, one of the most wonderful lines that Master ever wrote was in his poem, Samadhi. All flowing I, everywhere. And then he said, from bliss I came, from joy I came, from joy I live, in sacred joy I melt. These two concepts. First of all, that there's nothing wrong with I. The thing that's wrong with I is when you limit your sense of I, when you think that I'm just this little ego, this little personality. But you will always be I. You can't get away from that. That is the reality of the entire universe. Every atom rings with that thought of I. But when you take to yourself, instead of joining in the fun and spreading that sense of I, when you can give to others and feel that in giving, you're sharing with yourself. That's where bliss is found. When you think of taking from others, that's when bliss is lost. And so in that concept of spreading this sense of I, then the next thing comes, bliss. Everything, every point of space is a vibration of bliss. That I itself is blissful. And the reason it isn't blissful for most people is because they limit it in time, they limit it in space, they limit it to things. What we need to do is break out of this sense of confinement and realize that we are a part of the great, all-flowing, blissful I everywhere. When you can do that, then you will see what this temple is all about. It isn't to be important. It isn't to build a great edifice. It's to serve, and that's why it's so lovely again to have this dome, an expansive hemisphere reaching out to the world. The more we can share our bliss and our calmness with others, the more we find that we ourselves find fulfillment. You will find yourself fulfilled when you don't have to kill the ego. You just have to realize this I is everywhere. You are that everywhere. And that's what this book is about. I really feel that of all that I've written, this is the best. And it isn't even mine. I've written it in Master's name, as indeed I've done everything in his name. But this, perhaps more than ever, I can tell you that it was for me a blissful, wonderful experience to find how he guided my thoughts all the way through. It was really what he wanted to say. It was just said the way he wanted to say it too. I believe that. So I was very pleased to be able to come here and share with you on this occasion, because to me it's a very important one. Thank you, and bless for you for what you're doing.